Hey everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is beaubernierfrank. I'm 27 years old. I live in Pacific Grove and I'm a painter. Today I thought I'd invite you into my studio and also into my process and talk to you a little bit about what it is I do and why I do the things that I do. So in the past, I used to sketch all my drawings out, but now I skip that step and I go straight to paints. I usually water it down with mineral spirits or with turpenoid, and I use some burnt umber, and this just allows me to kind of sketch out the outline and compose the piece. The reason why I'm using burnt umber for the background is because some of that color does seep through the layers of paint and it gives a little bit more warmth to the painting. So at this point, I'm just trying to cover up as much ground as possible and to lay out the design. I'm not really focused on color. I'm more focused on composition and just giving a little bit of structure. A lot of the paint marks that I'm adding on now, I know I'll be covering up later. So at this point, I'm just kind of doing more of the darker areas before I start adding in those highlights and colorful aspects. Once those deep dark tones are laid out, I can start adding in the foliage, adding in more of those highlights on the leaves, and start playing around with color. So when it comes to developing a style or creating some kind of cohesive painting, I tend to like to have very busy, detailed areas contrasted with very simplistic, open areas. I tend to leave my skies very simple, very desaturated, very monochrome. And then whenever I have areas that are focused, I tend to go very deep, very dark, very textured, and to add a variation of brush strokes. When I'm painting trees or plants or shrubs, I try to create a variation of lines. This is meant to be organic. It's not supposed to be organized. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's supposed to be this sense of everything is just growing at its own pace. Some of the lines are short, some of the lines are long, some are thick. I'm adding different types of colors. I'm not afraid to play with texture, so adding on certain areas that are thicker than others. This just creates an illusion of depth, an illusion of organic material, a feeling that this is alive and breathing. It does take quite a bit of patience, and sometimes I ask myself if this is really what I want to be doing with my time. But there is something very therapeutic about disconnecting from the busyness of the world and reconnecting with the practice of painting. Up close, these little dots seem to make no sense at all. It's just a line here, a dot there, a line here, a dot there. And when I look at it from a very up in my face point of view, it just looks like a mumbo jumbo. But when I step back and I look at the cohesiveness of the piece, I look at the depth and the color variation, those Jackson Pollock marks that I made up close all seem to make sense when I step a few feet back. Because this is a circle panel, it was kind of hard to balance it on my easel, so I decided to paint directly on the wall. I have this Z-bar that's screwed into the wall with my canvas hanging on that, and so it creates a very sturdy easel. Highly recommend 10 out of 10 to paint on walls. If you're allowed to make holes into the wall, that is. Every painter has their own preference in terms of working in the day or at night or in plein air, but for me personally, I love painting inside with lights above me and with my light next to me. When I paint with natural light, because natural light is constantly changing depending on if it's a cool or warm day, it's kind of hard for me to figure out which colors I'm really using. So it's not until it's under those artificial pure white lights that I can see exactly what colors I'm working with. If you don't mind having a nice kind of just go with the flow color palette where colors will be reflected depending on the day that you painted it, then it's totally not necessary or even relevant. But because I love a certain specific color palette and when I get it photographed, I want those same colors to be reflected, I tend to paint in pure white light. Once I've really started to build up that depth and create that intensity in the work, I'm not trying to cover it up with big, strong, bold brush marks. Instead, what I do is I add glazes. Glazes are these semi-transparent layers that are mostly medium with a little bit of paint. This doesn't completely change the colors of the painting. It just allows you to see all the work that's been done before it, but then pushing it in a different direction. So I can add some deeper blues to create a little bit more intensity or create more turquoise colors, for instance, in the ocean. I can create a wash where I can completely warm up an area or cool it down. And since I've fallen in love with liquid, it's hard for me to step away. But it's been great in terms of just giving me that extra oomph factor in a lot of my artwork. So a neat trick I discovered on this painting is that if I use a leveler, it will help me create a perfect horizon line. When I was painting, I just kind of eyeballed it and I thought that looks a little bit off. Let me try and fix it. And when I put the leveler, it definitely showed that it was a little bit lopsided. When I work with glazes, I either use a 50% stand oil, 50% Gamsol blend, or I go in the direction of liquid with my paints. And this just allows me to create a wash where I don't completely cover my lines. I just create a change and shift in value and intensity of color. That's kind of what I just did here with the sky, focusing on creating a very soft gradient where it really feels like it goes from light to dark. I wanted to reference what I spoke about earlier when it comes to painting plants, trees, and shrubs, or things that are organic. You don't want to create things that look too systematic. For instance, if you're painting something architectural like a building or windows, you have these lines and you know exactly how far they need to be spaced, and it's all very much a pattern. When you're painting things like clouds or things like waves on the ocean, these are organic materials. These things don't always react the way that you think they're going to react. And so creating a nice variety of line work and creating a nice variety of textures and color hues really does dictate what the painting will feel like when viewed at the very end. So I'm not really sure when this shift happened, but a few years back I started painting seascapes and water, and I just couldn't kick that trend. It seems to appear in almost all of my work, whether I'm doing something that's figurative that just happens to be at a beach, or someone coming out of the water, or creating a portrait with a wave on it. Painting the ocean is always a treat, and I just can't seem to get tired of it. It's hard to know exactly when a painting is done, but for me, I typically rely on my intuition to answer that question. I need to step away and come back with fresh eyes to spot what needs more attention, what areas of the painting need a little bit more love. Maybe I can grab my brush and add a little highlight here, or cut a line here, soften an edge, whatever's required in the moment. A fun little trick I learned from Casey Baugh was to splatter paint on the canvas with your index finger, grabbing the brush and splattering it. What this does is it creates a subtle change in value, but not painted over like a glaze. Instead, this just creates a sort of natural highlight or softened effect. It's kind of like adding on a very gentle diffused airbrush effect. So in the water, I noticed that it seemed a little bit flat, so I just kind of went ahead and created more contrast. So adding on those little highlights in the water where the light catches it, but also creating a little bit more depth and shade on the waves. So here I'm adding not a pure white, but instead a kind of fluorescent greenish yellow tone that has quite a bit of white in it. I originally started this painting in December of 2019. I was visiting my family in California, and I made a little trip to Big Sur to see some friends down there. And when I came back to my studio, I decided to recreate a scene that I was very familiar with. I used to work as a server at a restaurant called Sierra Mar, and they had this circle window facing north, and the view from that window was this epic coastline with redwoods on the hillside and lots of open ocean and horizon. I started it, and then I moved back to New York, where I was living in upstate New York in Rochester. And during that winter, I was DM'd by a person saying like, hey, I really like this painting that you started. I was wondering if it was for sale. And I said, yes, it's for sale, but it's not done. And they said, great, we'd actually like to purchase it from you. So they put a 50% deposit, and now it was up to me to actually complete the work. Since the edges were raw, they asked if it was possible to add some kind of platinum edging. The reason being is that they actually got married on Post Ranch property, and their wedding bands were made of platinum. And so I thought, well, maybe I could paint the edges with platinum paint, but then I thought that could be tacky. So instead, I decided to order some platinum leafing and try to platinum leaf the edges. And boy, did I get a rude awakening. It is definitely a process and it definitely takes a lot of skill, I would say. And I ordered the leafing loose because that's the only way that it came, and it took me about 4 hours to complete finishing off the edges. This was a learning experience. I had never done any type of leafing prior to this, so I was kind of just like taking a risk, and the clients were like, totally fine, do what you can. And I was like, great. So I ended up doing this little thin 1-inch border around the edges out of platinum leaf. And when I went to seal it with a varnish, I ended up peeling off the majority of the leafing that I had applied. So I had to order another batch and apply a second coat of leafing. Overall, just to get the border done, it took me almost a month because I had to wait for the shipment. And then I had to create the border all over again. So that was a journey that I learned a lot. I'm glad I did it. It was exhausting, but actually very fun. I didn't even notice the time go by. That's one of the really cool things about being an artist, is that I don't always know what's around the corner. I'm open to the possibilities of trying something I've never done before. It's easy to get lost when the work feels cumbersome or difficult and repetitive. But I think that when I look back at the process of making it and all those little things that had to happen in the order that it had to happen, it all comes together and it all makes sense. Every brushstroke matters because it leads into the next brushstroke. Even though I grew up drawing and sketching and playing around with different mediums, I never anticipated becoming an artist, and I never even thought that it was a potential career. And yet here we are. So I feel very fortunate to be able to say that I'm a painter, and I feel so grateful to be able to live in an area that is so beautiful and which inspires me. And right now I'm excited to share with you some new upcoming projects that have been taking up a lot of my time. I've actually not been painting as much as I would like, but the reason why is because I've been working on creating t-shirts, creating hats, creating stickers, and creating different types of merch and products. And I'm also excited to share with you that I just started a Patreon account with exclusive content found only on that platform. So if you'd like to subscribe to one of the tiers that I have available there, please do so at patreon.com/beaubernierfrank. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.